Welcome back to Morning Joe. Joining us now, former CIA Director John Brennan. He's a senior national security and intelligence analyst for NBC News. Director Brennan, great to have you with us again this morning.
Good morning.
Wanted to talk to you about the president's performance overseas in France and also yesterday here at home on the observance of Veterans Day. He obviously skipped that ceremony for the end of 100 years of the end of World War I in France because of the weather. Yesterday did not go to Arlington National Cemetery on Veterans Day, as has been tradition for presidents. We're trying to figure out why. These are sort of easy ceremonial things that presidents do, and he's proclaimed himself as a great advocate for the military throughout the campaign and as president. What's your hunch about why he's not participating in some of these and hasn't, by the way, gone to a war zone in almost 2 years as president?
Well, it is puzzling because he put such emphasis on the military, and these were relatively easy to do events, both in France as well as here. I don't know whether or not he gets in some moods and just sort of sulks and doesn't want to be part of these ceremonies, and whether it was just the weather and he was concerned about what that might do to his image. But it really is one of the more puzzling aspects of Mr. Trump's performance.
Mike, what's your instinct on that?
Well, my first instinct is enormous sadness that we have a president of the United States who doesn't get the historical legacy of all of these traditions that he has avoided, both in Paris and yesterday at Arlington. But I was thinking about one of his, maybe his only appearance over in Langley at the CIA, standing in front of that wall with the stars on it of people, former agency employees and who have lost their lives, and he doesn't get it. And I think he has no sense of history about almost everything other than his own life. He's so narcissistic, he's so self-involved that he doesn't get the meaning of the cemeteries, the American cemeteries overseas. He doesn't get the Tomb of the Unknown and the tradition of the president laying the wreath. I don't know.
I think, as you pointed out, he doesn't have a sense of history, because anybody who knows and loves this country and knows all the sacrifices that men and women over so many years have paid, from World War I, World War II, and onward, you want to make sure that you pay homage to that and give the appropriate deference to it. And so whether it's at Arlington National Cemetery or at CIA's Memorial Wall, you want to make sure that you send a signal to the people that are gathered around, as well as to the nation, that this is important. Their legacy must be remembered. But as you said, Donald Trump is so absorbed in himself, and if it's not directly relevant to him, I think it takes second and third place to it. And this is really quite disappointing, I think, to so many veterans around the country and around the world about what really should be part of our lasting legacy.
On his Paris trip, the failure to attend the ceremony at the cemetery, in your experience, they talked about the rain and not wanting to put it in a 100-mile round trip motorcade. In your experience, would there have been a backup plan for rain for the president to get where he needed to be?
There would be a backup plan and a backup to the backup plan, and that was something that no president that I worked for would ever want to miss. They want to be part of it, and not just to send the signal that the American president is paying this homage to them, but also be part of the allied effort, those countries that worked so hard together in World War I and in subsequent wars, that you want to be seen as part of it as opposed to being separate from it. But I think everything we see right now is Donald Trump wants to be this separate individual person and not be part of a larger gathering. He wants the spotlight to be on him and him only.
He's had a rosy view of what's happening in North Korea. He wants to present himself as having brokered some great deal by which the North Koreans will give up their nuclear program at some point, although that's not in the agreement that was put out in public. A private report that was released yesterday shows 13 of an estimated 20 secret North Korean missile bases still working. North Korea is still working on its ballistic program. Where are we in this relationship with North Korea, and why is it important that we're getting information that contradicts what the president is saying?
The only thing that has changed really over the last year is the escalatory rhetoric that was going back and forth between Pyongyang and Washington has ceased, which is a positive thing and a good thing. But from my perspective, and by all accounts, Kim Jong-un's nuclear program and his ballistic missile program have not been scaled back at all. If anything, there are indications that they continue to work and develop these programs. So I know Mr. Trump has said that the summit in Singapore was a great success. I have not seen any success at all. And I think Kim Jong-un has really been masterful in terms of how he has duped Mr. Trump.
There was an intercept of a call that the United States now has Gina Haspel has heard the call. It's a New York Times great reporting. After Khashoggi was killed, call to Saudi Arabia, to Riyadh, saying, tell your boss that it's over. They've, in effect, assassinated Mr. Khashoggi. What's your view of what's going on now and what ought to happen now?
Well, by everything I know about Saudi Arabia, in terms of my time there and working with the Saudis as well as now, there is no way that this killing could have taken place by these individuals who are closely affiliated with the Crown Prince without the Crown Prince authorization. And so I think we've seen a very concerted effort on the part of the leadership under Crown Prince's direction to identify scapegoats and to identify the people who were responsible for what they are claiming is this rogue operation. And I don't see the pressure being applied on Saudi Arabia from the White House. It is clear that Gina Haspel and other intelligence officers in other countries have listened to the tape, and it's very clear that this was a horrific killing that needs to be addressed. But until the White House, until Mr. Trump clearly says that the Crown Prince bears responsibility for this, I think the Saudis are going to continue to circle the wagons, and they're going to try to deflect and deny and hope that this is just going to go away.
Some analysts have suggested that this moment in the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia is a good one to reevaluate what the United States has done in terms of backing the war in Yemen, and perhaps to pull back from its support of Saudi Arabia's effort in Yemen, where there's casualties among civilians, mass famine, and worse. Is this a good time for the United States to pull back in Yemen and its support of Saudi Arabia?
Absolutely. This war has been going on much too long, and the Saudis have not given the appropriate consideration for deaths of civilians. Over the weekend, Susan Rice, myself, and about a dozen and a half or so former Obama administration officials called for a cessation of all U.S. military support, not just refueling, but weapons and other types of things. Clearly, the Iranians have been trying to exploit the situation in Yemen for a number of years, but the Saudis have certainly overplayed the military card, and the carnage, the bloodshed, the destruction of Yemen has just been awful. And there's a humanitarian disaster there now, and the White House, Donald Trump, Mike Pompeo, and others need to make it very clear to the Saudis that this must stop. You do not have this blank check to continue to use U.S. military assistance and support. So we've called for an immediate cessation of all types of military assistance to Saudi Arabia.
With the benefit of hindsight, was it a mistake for the Obama administration to support the Saudis in Yemen?
Well, at the time, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was the defense minister. He wasn't the Crown Prince, and I think we were hoping that he was going to treat the issue with the appropriate care that it needed, but he has not. And so was it a mistake early on? I think if we had a chance to do it over again, I think we would have put many more limitations on the support to Saudi Arabia.
Former CIA Director John Brennan, always good to talk to you. Thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks, Willie.
Coming up on Morning Joe, we will talk to Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand after she said she's thinking about running for president in 2020. And later, Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow of Michigan joins our conversation. Morning Joe is coming right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.